I guess you could say I've always been the predictable guy. Married at 27, steady job in corporate sales by 30, and a mortgage locked in by 32. Now, at 35, my life is the definition of routine. Morning coffee, long hours at the office, home. By 7, dinner with my wife Emily, and collapsing in front of the TV before bed. I wasn't complaining. Stability was comforting. But comfort has a way of dulling you when you're not paying attention. Things at work had been tense for months. Budget cuts, layoffs rumored in the break room, and my boss, Darren, breathing down my neck about hitting sales targets. So when he called me into his office last Thursday, I braced for the worst. The door shut behind me, and I was already rehearsing the lines. Thank you for the opportunity. I understand the company's direction. But instead, Darren leaned back in his chair, smirking like he knew something I didn't. I need you to go to China, he said, his voice casual, like he wasn't sending me halfway across the world with 2 days' notice. China, I blinked, caught off guard. When? Saturday. You'll be meeting with our suppliers in Guangzhou? It's important we secure this deal before the quarter ends. He tossed a folder across the desk, but before I could pick it up, he added, Cindy's coming too. I figured you could use the help with negotiations. Cindy, his wife. The woman who was the center of whispered conversations at company parties, with her sleek red dresses and perfectly styled hair. I'd only spoken to her a handful of times, just polite small talk, but even I couldn't ignore the way she seemed to own any room she walked into. The thought of spending a week in close quarters with her made my throat dry up. Sure, I managed to say, even though alarm bells were already ringing in my head. This had complication written all over it. Emily was supportive, as always. It's a great opportunity, she said, while folding laundry the night before my flight. Just don't forget to bring me back something nice from the markets. She smiled, kissed me, and went back to matching socks. I watched her for a moment, her brown hair tied in a messy bun, wearing the oversized college sweatshirt she always slept in. My wife. The woman I'd built a life with. As I packed my suitcase, that night I reminded myself, stay professional. Cindy is your boss's wife. Nothing else. By the time I arrived in China, jet-lagged and disoriented, Cindy was already waiting in the hotel lobby. She wore black heels and a fitted blazer, her hair cascading down her shoulders like she'd just stepped out of a fashion magazine. I tried not to notice. I failed. Glad you made it, Kobe, she said, her voice smooth and welcoming. Long flight? Yeah, I replied, adjusting my tie awkwardly. Hope you slept better than I did. Barely, she chuckled, and something about the way she smiled at me felt familiar. Not in a we've worked together before way, but in a we've shared something intimate way, even though we hadn't. We took a cab to the supplier's office, making polite conversation about the city and the humidity. But by the time we wrapped up our first day of meetings, the undercurrent between us was undeniable. I'd catch her eyes lingering on mine for just a second too long, or she'd laugh a little harder than necessary at my jokes. It was subtle, but enough to keep my mind racing. Dinner that night was supposed to be low-key, just two colleagues sharing a meal to debrief. The restaurant was dimly lit with soft jazz playing in the background, and before I knew it, we'd ordered a second bottle of wine. Cindy loosened up, talking about how she hated the pressure of being the perfect boss's wife, how lonely it could feel, and how Darren barely noticed her anymore. Sometimes I wonder, she said, swirling her wine, if anyone really sees me for who I am, or if they just see Darren's accessory. I didn't know how to respond to that, but the vulnerability in her voice struck a chord. I knew what it felt like to be invisible, to go through the motions while craving something more. I see you, I said, and as soon as the words left my mouth, I knew I'd crossed a line. Her eyes flicked up to meet mine, and for a moment, the noise of the restaurant faded into the background. Do you? She asked softly. I nodded, my heart thudding in my chest. The tension was suffocating, and I knew I should get up, pay the bill, and put an end to whatever this was before it went any further. But I didn't move. Back at the hotel, we stepped into the elevator together. Neither of us said a word, but the silence wasn't empty. It was thick with everything unspoken. My floor came first, and when the elevator dinged, I hesitated, unsure if I should leave or stay. "Good night," Cindy said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded and stepped out, but as the doors began to close, I heard her say, "Kobe, wait!" I turned, and in that split second, I saw it. The vulnerability, the need, the same craving I felt inside me reflected back in her eyes. The doors slid shut before I could respond, leaving me standing in the hallway with my heart in my throat. Back. In my room, I paced. My mind was a war zone. Part of me wanted to knock on her door to give in to the temptation that was pulling me toward her like a riptide. But then I thought of Emily, my wife, the woman who trusted me, who kissed me goodbye without a second thought. I sat on the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. "What the hell are you doing, Kobe?" But no matter how hard I tried to shake it, the thought of Cindy was like a song stuck on repeat. I couldn't stop replaying that look she'd given me. When my phone buzzed, my breath hitched. It was a message from Cindy. Couldn't sleep. Mind grabbing a drink at the bar downstairs? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to stay in my room and lock the door. But instead, I found myself typing, "Be there in 10. The elevator ride back down to the hotel bar felt like an out-of-body experience. My brain was screaming at me to turn around, but my body had other plans. My palms were damp, my heart pounding like I was a teenager sneaking out past curfew. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew exactly where this could lead. But something about Cindy, her vulnerability, her need, made it feel like gravity pulling me in, something I couldn't fight. When I stepped into the dimly lit bar, she was already there, sitting in a corner booth with 2 glasses of whiskey on the table. She wasn't wearing her blazer anymore, just a silk camisole that clung to her shoulders in a way that made it impossible to look away. She smiled when she saw me, and it wasn't the polite smile she gave at company parties. It was softer, warmer, like she was genuinely happy I showed up. I slid into the seat across from her, clearing my throat. "Couldn't sleep either." I lied. "Jet lag's the worst," she said, taking a sip of her drink. "Thanks for coming down." I didn't want to sit here alone. For a moment, we just sat there, sipping our drinks in silence. I kept telling myself this was innocent. Just 2 colleagues sharing a nightcap, nothing more. But the way she looked at me with those tired, searching eyes made it feel like more. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, setting her glass down. "You said something at dinner that stuck with me." I knew exactly what she was talking about. "I see you." The words echoed in my head like a warning siren, but I stayed quiet, waiting for her to continue. "Do you really mean that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you see me, Kobe? Or was that just something you said to be nice?" I wanted to lie, to brush it off and steer the conversation somewhere safe, but I couldn't. There was something raw in her voice that wouldn't let me. "I meant it," I said, my throat tightening. "I see you, Cindy. More than you probably realize." She exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath waiting for my answer. "God," she whispered, leaning back against the booth. "I don't even remember the last time someone said that to me." My fingers tightened around my glass. I should have said something to diffuse the moment, but instead, I asked the question I'd been avoiding all night. "Is it really that bad with Darren?" She laughed bitterly, her eyes glassy from the whiskey, or maybe something deeper. "Bad enough that I can't remember the last time he looked at me like I mattered. It's always about him, his job, his success. I'm just there, like a trophy on a shelf." Her words hit me harder than they should have. I wasn't supposed to care this much, but I did. "You're more than that," I said quietly. "You deserve more than that." Her gaze locked on mine, and the air between us shifted. Suddenly, the background noise of the bar disappeared. It was just us, sitting there in the glow of dim lights, with unspoken desires hanging in the air like a storm waiting to break. She leaned forward, her hand brushing against mine on the table. "Kobe," she murmured, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what I'm doing, Neither did I, but when her fingers laced through mine, I didn't pull away. My pulse was racing, my thoughts spiraling out of control. Emily's face flashed through my mind, but it wasn't enough to stop me. I was too far gone. I don't either, I admitted. But I can't stop thinking about you. There it was, the truth, laid bare between us. And once it was out, there was no taking it back. Cindy's breath hitched, and for a moment I thought she might cry. Instead, she squeezed my hand and said, "Come upstairs with me." Time slowed down. My mind scrambled to find a reason to say no, to pull myself back from the edge of this cliff. But every excuse crumbled under the weight of the way she looked, at me, like I was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. "I can't," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. I didn't mean it, not really. "Yes, you can," she whispered. Her eyes searched mine, desperate and pleading. "Just tonight. No one has to know." The words hung there, tempting. Me. It would be so easy. No Emily, no Darren. Just us, in a place where no one knew who we were or what we were doing. I could pretend, just for one night, that this wasn't a mistake. My phone buzzed in my pocket, jolting me out of the moment. I pulled it out and saw Emily's name on the screen. My stomach dropped. She had sent me a photo of our dog curled, up on the couch, followed by a simple message. "Miss you. Come home soon." I stared at the screen, guilt crashing over me like a tidal wave. What the hell was I doing? Emily trusted me. She loved me. And here I was, seconds away from betraying her, in the worst possible way. "I can't do this," I said, pulling my hand away from Cindy's. My voice was stronger this time, more certain. "I'm sorry, but I can't." Her face crumpled, and for a moment I thought she might lash out, call me a coward or accuse me of leading her on. But instead, she just nodded, blinking back tears. "I get it," she whispered. "I shouldn't have asked." I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it wasn't her fault, but I knew that wouldn't help. So I stood up, threw some cash on the table to cover the drinks, and walked away. The elevator ride back to my room felt suffocating. I could barely breathe. My hands trembled as I unlocked the door and collapsed onto the bed. I stared at the ceiling, replaying everything in my head. The way Cindy had looked at me, the way I'd almost given in. I was supposed to be stronger than this. But the truth was, I wasn't. I had come so close to ruining everything. And the worst part was, a part of me still wanted to go back down to that bar and finish what we started. I grabbed my phone and called Emily. It was late back home, but she answered after a few rings, her voice groggy but warm. "Hey, everything okay?" Hearing her voice broke something inside me. "Yeah," I lied, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Just wanted to hear your voice." She laughed softly. "You're such a sap. I love you, you know that?" "I know," I whispered. "I love you too." When we hung up, I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, fighting the urge to knock on Cindy's door. Eventually, I fell asleep, but even in my dreams, I couldn't escape the weight of what almost happened. The next morning, I avoided Cindy. At breakfast, I sat at a table across the room, pretending to be engrossed in emails. She didn't approach me, but I could feel her eyes on me the entire time. The tension was unbearable, but I didn't trust myself to talk to her. Not after last night. As the day went on, the distance between us grew. We kept things professional during meetings, but the spark that had ignited last night still smoldered beneath the surface. By the time we returned to the hotel that evening, I was emotionally drained. I thought I had dodged the bullet, that the worst was over. But when I got back to my room, there was a knock at the door. My heart stopped. I knew who it was before. I even opened it. Cindy stood there, her eyes swollen like she'd been crying. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me with a mixture of regret and longing. "I just wanted to say goodbye," she finally said. "I'm leaving tonight. Darren needs me back home." I nodded, unsure of what to say. A part of me was relieved, but another part of me felt like something unfinished was being ripped away. "Take care of yourself, Kobe," she whispered, and before I could respond, she turned and walked away. I shut the door, leaning against it as the weight of everything came crashing down on me. I hadn't crossed the line, but I danced dangerously close to it. And the guilt of almost losing everything was something I wasn't sure I'd ever shake. I spent the next hour pacing my hotel room, replaying the moment Cindy left. My chest felt tight, and my thoughts spiraled like a storm I couldn't calm. I had done the right thing, or at least I had convinced myself of that. I didn't sleep with her. I didn't destroy my marriage. But the shame I felt was just as suffocating as if I had, because truthfully, I had betrayed Emily. Not physically, but emotionally. I had let myself crave someone else. I had held Cindy's hand, thought about her lips, imagined the rush of giving in, and that somehow felt worse. I wasn't sure how I'd ever be able to look my wife in the eyes without feeling like a fraud. The next day was a blur of meetings, handshakes, and contract negotiations. I was running on fumes, barely able to keep up appearances. Cindy was gone, but the weight of her presence lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. I avoided checking my phone because I was terrified of seeing another message from Emily, one of her sweet, trusting texts that would make me want to crawl under the hotel bed in shame. By the time the flight home rolled around, I was exhausted. I spent the entire 14-hour journey overthinking everything. What if Cindy told Darren? What if this got back to the office? What if Emily found out? The consequences of what almost happened kept spiraling through my head, making my pulse race. When I landed back home, I felt like I was walking into a trap. The guilt had burrowed so deep into my chest that I was sure Emily would be able to see it in my face. As I grabbed my suitcase from the baggage carousel, my phone buzzed with a message. Waiting outside. Can't wait to see you. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing deeply to steady myself. Be normal, Kobe. Just be normal. Emily was standing, outside the terminal, her smile bright enough to melt the chill of the February air. She wore her favorite green coat, the one I bought her for Christmas last year, and when she saw me, she waved like we'd been apart for months instead of just a week. Hey, you, she said, wrapping her arms around me in a hug so warm it almost brought tears to my eyes. I missed you. I missed you too, I whispered, holding her a little too tightly. That night I tried to slip back into my old life, but the cracks were already showing. I sat across from Emily at the dinner table, nodding as she told me about her week. But my mind was a million miles away. I couldn't stop thinking about Cindy's last words to me. Take care of yourself, Kobe. Why did that sound so final? Like she knew something I didn't. You okay? Emily's voice broke through my thoughts, and I realized I had been staring at my plate without eating. Yeah, I lied, forcing a smile. Just tired from the trip. She gave me a sympathetic look. Well, you're home now. No more work talk tonight, okay? Just us. Her words should have comforted me, but instead they made the knot in my chest tighten. I excused myself early, blaming jet lag, and crawled into bed while Emily cleaned up downstairs. As I lay there in the dark, the guilt twisted inside me, like a knife. The next morning, I thought about confessing. I thought about sitting Emily down and telling her everything, how I'd been tempted, how close I came to ruining us. But the words refused to leave my throat. What good would it do? I hadn't physically cheated. I hadn't crossed that final line. Admitting my emotional betrayal would only hurt her, maybe beyond repair. So, I convinced myself that staying silent was the right thing to do. I buried it. I told myself that as long as Cindy was gone and no one else knew, I could move on. But the problem with guilt is that it doesn't just disappear, it festers, growing like a wound that refuses to heal. 2 weeks passed. I threw myself into work, avoiding conversations about the business trip whenever Darren or my coworkers asked how it went. Emily noticed I was distant, but she didn't push. She trusted me too much to suspect anything. And that trust made the guilt unbearable. One Friday night, I was sitting on the couch scrolling mindlessly through my phone while Emily dozed off next to me. That's when the notification popped up, a message from Cindy. I froze, my thumb hovering over the screen. I hadn't heard from her since she left the hotel. I thought she was done with me, that we'd both silently agreed to move on. But there it was. Can we talk? My pulse pounded in my ears. I glanced at Emily, her breathing slow and steady. Completely, unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I could have ignored the message. I should have. But my hand had a mind of its own, and before I knew it, I had opened the message. I've been thinking about you. I know we said goodbye, but I can't stop wondering what would have happened if you hadn't pulled away. I stared at the words, my mouth dry. She wasn't over it. And if I was being honest with myself, neither was I. I deleted the message, tossed my phone on the coffee table, and rubbed my hands over my face. Don't respond, don't ruin everything, but the damage was already done. Cindy was in my head again, her words like a spark threatening to ignite everything I'd tried to bury. The next morning, I woke up before Emily and went for a drive. I needed to clear my head, to figure out what the hell I was going to do. I parked at a coffee shop, ordered something I didn't even want, and sat in the corner trying to convince myself that I could handle this, that I was strong enough to resist. But temptation doesn't go away just because you ignore it. It waits. By the time I got back home, Emily was in the kitchen making pancakes, her hair still messy from sleep. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, and something inside me cracked. I couldn't keep lying to her. "I need to tell you something," I blurted out, my voice shaking. Her smile faded. "What is it?" I sat down at the kitchen table, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself speak. "On the business trip, something happened. I didn't cheat on you, but I almost did." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't say anything. The silence was suffocating. "What do you mean, almost?" she whispered. I told her everything, about the late-night drinks with Cindy, the elevator ride, the message at the bar. I didn't leave out a single detail because she deserved the truth, even if it destroyed us. When I finished, tears streamed down her face. "You promised me, Kobe. You promised me you'd never do something like this." "I know," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She stood up, wiping her tears away. "I need time," she said quietly. "I don't know what this means for us yet." And just like that, she walked upstairs, leaving me sitting at the kitchen table with the weight of my mistakes crushing me. It's been a month since I confessed. Emily hasn't left, but things aren't the same. The easy laughter, the stolen kisses in the kitchen, they're gone. We're in marriage counseling now, trying to piece together the trust I shattered. Some days I feel hopeful. Other days, I wonder if I'll ever deserve her forgiveness. I haven't heard from Cindy since. I deleted her number, blocked her on everything. But it doesn't matter. The temptation still haunts me, not because I miss her, but because I know how close I came to losing everything that mattered. This is my life now, living in the aftermath of almost cheating. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that almost is just as dangerous as the real thing. It's strange, isn't it? How one moment can change everything. Some days I wonder if I made the right choice by confessing. Maybe I should have. Buried it, kept it locked away like a bad memory that fades over time. Would Emily have been happier not knowing? Would I have been able to move on and pretend it never happened? I thought telling the truth would lift the weight off my chest, but instead it feels like I've passed it to her. And now, we're both carrying it. What do you think? Did I do the right thing by coming clean? Or did I just make things worse? Maybe honesty isn't always the best policy. But then again, lies have a way of growing, don't they? Just like this temptation did. Anyway, thanks for sticking around to listen. It's funny. I thought saying it out loud would help. But it doesn't. Not really.